Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are so excited that you're joining us today.
We have some special guests that are joining us from Burden of Proof.
Welcome to Savannah and Elysia.
Thank you.
We're so excited to be here.
We're excited that we get to sit back and listen to one of your cases.
We enjoy your podcast, and we are really excited to do this collaboration with you ladies.
Us too. I told our listeners for the past couple weeks, I'm going to be ready with my shovel.
Yes, they're very excited about the shovel.
That was my hint to them as to what this collab was all about.
That's awesome.
We're digging up those dirt bags.
Yeah, or at least the details on them.
Right.
Yes.
Did you want to tell us anything about yourselves or just get right into your case?
We can share. So our podcast is kind of like yours. We're two friends, but with a generation difference. Savannah is a Gen Z. I am technically a Zennial, but we'll say Gen X. And we are two paralegals that work together in a law firm first. And then we shared a love of true crime and decided to talk with everyone about it. So we cover cases similar to yours, but we try our best to go into more detail on the court side, on the court cases.
Yeah, we like to make it a little bit more easy to understand and break down the legalese for everybody, while also getting to muse about the differences in our age groups.
Awesome. We love it.
Well, thank you so much for having us on. And you guys chose a case that we did on our show already, and it was one of our favorites to do. The Lady in the Barrel. She was quite the mystery. So we can jump into it if you're ready.
We are ready. We're excited to hear this one. I don't know a lot about this case.
Oh, you're in for
Awesome.
a treat. You're in for a treat. It's one of our listeners' favorites, and it's one of my favorite cases that we've ever done.
Awesome.
Alrighty. So picture it. September of 1999 in the suburb of Jericho, Long Island, New York. Homeowner Ron Cohen and his wife made the decision to move since their children were getting older. The 10 years had been fairly good in the home despite several strange and potentially paranormal experiences, which we will get into.
Oh, this is already up my alley.
What? I have to drive home after this. It's already late.
But the family was obviously ready to move on. And upon the buyer's final walkthrough of the home, they specified that they wanted the Cohens to clear everything out of the crawl space that was underneath the back porch. This turned out to be a real-life horror story for the Cohen family. When they had bought the home, the Cohens did not make the same request and had left the 55-gallon drum or barrel in the back of that space.
Ooh.
It was really just a space that they used to store things like coolers and beach chairs, stuff like that. So the barrel was never really in the way. Ron assumed it had possibly been leftover material from when they built the addition and the back porch onto the home. So he never really thought twice about it. He wasn't thrilled that the buyer wanted him to dispose of it, but he understood. So he figured he'd start by trying to set it out on the curb with the garbage. But when he went to move it, he realized it was way too heavy. So he waited until the movers came and he asked them to help. They managed to get it to the curb, but neglected to think about the fact that there are weight limits on what garbage collectors would take. So come trash pickup day, the can was left with a note telling Ron he would need to open the barrel up and unload some of the weight in order for them to take it.
Oh no. How are they not suspicious right from the start? A heavy barrel? Is that just because we do true crime that we would have been immediately wondering what was in the barrel?
I thought actually, I can totally see myself not caring at all what's in the barrel. I can imagine going, Yeah, it's probably just left over and just like not caring. Is that horrible of me?
No, I'm
don't
thinking
think
the
it's
exact same
horrible.
thing. It's somebody else's trash. Let them deal with it. Like, let's just move.
Yeah, I
and
don't
get
want to
on
deal with
it.
somebody. Yeah.
Not me. I see a garbage bag on the side of the highway and I'm like, is that a body? Who's in that bag?
Yeah, I personally think I would have been interested to know what was in it. I still would have really wanted to get rid of it, but
Mhm.
I think it would have gotten the better of me and I would have opened it up long before I was asked to move it. So, using a screwdriver to open the sealed barrel and lifted the lid, it released an absolute toxic odor.
Oh, could you imagine?
After taking a step back and regaining his composure, he realized a woman's boot had surfaced in the thick liquid.
Oh my goodness.
Gross.
You would never get that smell out of your nostrils.
Yeah. It kind of made me think of an Anchorman when when they're talking about the cologne and it's, what is it, Panther? So it was difficult to know for sure because throughout the liquid, there was some sort of material in the form of little pellets, but he thought he saw a hand as well. He immediately called the police and he turned out to be right. It was a body entombed in the barrel. Detectives were just as shocked as Ron because it wasn't bones they were looking at, but a hand with skin. It was like mummified.
That's incredible, actually.
In liquid?
Yes.
There's actually some really incredible parts of this case, specifically with the mummification of the body.
Of course, detectives questioned Ron about the barrel, but did quickly conclude that he was likely being honest and didn't know anything about the barrel other than it had been under his house for the past 10 years. Emergency services had to bring a lift to get the barrel on a vehicle for transport because it weighed over 300 pounds.
Wow.
Once they got it to the medical examiner's office, they set the barrel on a sheet of plastic and a team clad in gas masks tipped the barrel on its side. Initially, all that came out was a dark green fluid, which was unusual according to detectives because decomposition fluid is typically transparent or maybe a reddish brown.
Great.
With the liquid out, they realized that the barrel had been almost filled with those little pellets I mentioned earlier. They weren't sure why, but theorized it was to either weigh down the body or possibly disguise it. The body had been pulled out of the barrel, and to everyone's shock, despite seeing the hand, the entire body was mummified. The skin and internal organs had been perfectly dried, but intact. The next thing detectives noted was her clothing. She was fully dressed in what would now be considered vintage clothing, a faux leopard skin coat, and a popular dress and shoes from the 1960s.
What? Authentic clothing from the 1960s?
Yes. And
So
it looked authentic.
Had she been in there that long?
You'll find out.
Okay, sorry. I'm so intrigued.
That's a perfect question. So this gave them a possible approximate time frame for her death, but the cause of death was obvious. Though the front of her head was still covered in thick black hair, all the hair on the back of her head had fallen out, and there was clear evidence of blunt force trauma to her skull. Detectives said the wounds also signify that the killer likely knew the victim and killed her out of anger.
Okay.
Because the blunt force trauma was so significant?
Yes, I believe so, because there wasn't any other evidence that seemed to be the logical cause of death. And I think they just assumed that, well, to be hit over the head and stuck in a barrel, it probably was somebody that knew her and it was personal.
Mm-hmm.
She was a small-framed woman who they believed could have been killed by just one or two blows, but the killer clearly hit her excessively. Once they had straightened her body out and could see her face, Their next clue in identifying her came through her dental work. The medical examiner explained to detectives that the gold inlay used in her denture work is often used in Central America, not in the U.S.
Oh.
Detectives were not comforted by this, as it indicated they were likely looking for the identity of an immigrant from the 1960s or 70s, which could prove challenging.
Yeah, no kidding. Paperwork would not have been fun from back then, if there was any at all.
Right. Then they were faced with the disturbing news that the medical examiner discovered the bones of an almost full-term fetus within her body.
Oh, no.
Instantly, detectives suspected the pregnancy had something to do with her murder, but some of the other evidence in the barrel left them puzzled. Among the other items found in the barrel were her personal belongings, like a purse, but there was also a 6-inch plastic stem with leaves. Just one. No flowers, just one stem. They didn't know if it was relevant to the case or just a piece of random trash left in the barrel. Either way, they kept it. And then they found within her purse a time capsule of items. The typical things that any woman would have carried in a purse in the 1960s. You know, a compact mirror, eyeliner, blush, a comb, and an address book.
Did they actually read the address book?
Yes.
What?
So I mentioned when we first did this case, because we have the generation differences, I mentioned for anybody who doesn't know or has forgotten what an address book is, people actually used to carry address books with phone numbers and addresses.
To which I get super defensive because I know what an address book is. I just don't need one. I just pulled mine out recently to do my wedding invitations, so I do know what they are.
Nice.
No, now we carry it around on our phone. We do still have address
Exactly.
books. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's just called the Contacts app.
that's right.
Yes.
Though knowing it would have been helpful in identifying the woman, detectives were skeptical because of its condition. It had been sitting in body fluids and whatever the green liquid was for at least 30 years.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, one detective explained that it was so saturated, you could have literally poked holes in it if you squeezed it too hard.
Wow.
It's hard to imagine how they're going to pull any information out of it.
Fortunately, their forensic department had a way to dry it out to see if they could get any information out of it, but it would take some time. So in the meantime, detectives searched missing persons reports, but came up empty-handed. Then, to their surprise, the forensic department made some progress with that address book. They were able to open the cover, and inside was the letter A with a multiple-digit number that followed. Detectives saw it as a possible confirmation that she was an immigrant, and that it was her, quote, alien number, as they used to call it. The Department of Immigration confirmed that it was, and they were able to provide them with her name and the date she entered the U.S.
Her name was Reyna Angelica Marroquin, and she was from El Salvador. She had come to the U.S. in 1966 alone in hopes of obtaining her dream career in fashion. However, she had regularly written to her family about her experiences in New York until the winter of 1968. When the letters and calls stopped, her family had no idea how to find her, so detectives' next step was to confirm who had owned Ron Cohen's house throughout the years and find any potential connections to Reyna. The house was built in 1962 and had only 4 owners throughout the years, which they ran criminal background checks on all of the owners but found no records. Before they attempted to talk to any of the previous owners, they decided to look into the barrel a little bit more first. They checked with the manufacturer of the barrel, who was able to tell them that it had been made in March of 1963 because of a number spray painted on the side. Fortunately, they had also kept records of who they sold all their barrels to, and the company they sold it to was still in business. It was sold to a plastics manufacturing business and was used in, drumroll please,
I'm terrible at drum rolls.
the dyeing of fake plastics, including fake flowers and leaves.
Oh, the stem.
Mm-hmm. Before they finished following up with that information, though, the forensics department notified them that the address book had finished drying out.
Is it the green sledge that, like, the plastic coating on those stems that's kept her preserved?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh,
Wow.
that is crazy.
Yes. Of course, much of the information was illegible after the damage done to the address book, but they did manage to get some phone numbers from it. They likely didn't expect much to come out of it, because what was the likelihood of people keeping the same phone number for 30 years, especially with the way that phones used to work? You didn't usually keep the same number if you moved, because there would have been a lapse in phone service, and you definitely didn't keep it if you moved to a different area code. To the detective's surprise, though, one person did keep her number and knew Reyna. In fact, she possibly knew her better than anyone else in New York City. The woman turned out to be Kathy Andrade, a close friend of Reyna's, and she was very happy to talk to detectives. Kathy broke down into tears when detectives showed her a picture of Reyna to confirm their victim was the same woman. She told them that she had met Reyna shortly after she arrived to New York and was looking for a job. Kathy worked in the garment industry and helped Reyna get into a position at the same company. She went on to tell them that she too was from El Salvador, so she and Reyna had become inseparable. Kathy said in the year that Reyna went missing, Reyna had suddenly told her she had to move out of the Catholic Services residence that she had been living in because she was pregnant with her married boyfriend's child.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, no.
There's your suspect. Or your dirtbag.
Your dirtbag, for sure. The boyfriend had moved Reyna to an apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey, and had been taking really good care of her and continuously told her that he was going to leave his wife and marry Reyna.
Oh, they always say that.
They do. However, when Reyna was nearly full term in her pregnancy, the man informed her that he was not going to leave his wife. And then Kathy received a call from Reyna saying that she had done, quote, a foolish thing. Reyna told Kathy that she had called his wife and told her about the pregnancy, and now the boyfriend was angry with her and specifically told Kathy he was going to kill me.
So when she disappeared originally, how come Kathy didn't go to the police?
She did, and we will get into that.
Okay.
Sorry.
We're just so invested. We want to know it all.
Gotta ask all the questions.
That's how I was when I first heard it. Kathy told her after this phone call, I will come over and stay with you so you don't have to worry about him causing you any harm. But when Kathy got to Reyna's apartment, the door was unlocked and no one was there. There was still warm food on the dining room table, though. She waited several hours for Reyna to come back, and when she didn't, Kathy went to the police to file a missing persons report. The officer she spoke to told her that it had only been a few hours, so Reyna was not considered missing yet. Reluctantly, Kathy went back home and the next day again tried to file the report, but the officer turned her away because she wasn't related to Reyna.
That is actually so heartbreaking that she showed up when the food was still warm. That means she just barely missed her.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
How haunting.
Yes. And it's important to keep in mind the time period that this happened in because, of course, when I was researching, my first reaction when I heard, oh, well, he turned her away because she wasn't family, I'm like, what are you talking about? But this was like the 1960s, so things were a lot different back then, we'll just say.
Yeah.
For sure.
So all Kathy could do was continue to try and contact Reyna, which she did for a while, but she never got a hold of her. Kathy lived for 30 years, concerned about the whereabouts of Reyna, but hoped that she had simply fled to safety back in El Salvador. Detectives now just had to find which owner of the home in Jericho that Reyna had a connection to. As he looked into the history of the home, he found a record that indicated the second owner of the home had applied for a permit for the addition to where the barrel was found. The permit was dated in 1980, but they still thought there had to be a connection. So they asked that owner, Arthur Eben, to come in for an interview, but it didn't start well. He denied building the addition and explained that he had simply been bringing the building up to code when he filed for the permits. He told them that the first owner was the one who had actually built the addition. With the shocking story being well reported in the local papers, Arthur must have heard what they had found because he also surprised detectives when he said, "Oh, and I found that barrel under the porch when I lived there, but I left it." Just like Ron Cohen, Arthur had thought it may have been something to do with the construction or the addition to the house and just left it.
There is always random just construction garbage that's left in places, especially underneath porches and stuff like that. So I can buy their story.
For sure. So next, the detectives asked him what he remembered about the first owner that he'd bought the house from, Howard Elkins. Arthur remembered that Howard was married with a couple kids and said he believed he was involved in or the owner of a plastics flower company in the city.
Oh.
When detectives looked into it and found the company that had bought the barrel from the manufacturer, they found it was Melrose Plastics and that Howard Elkins formerly owned it, along with a man named Melvin Gatman.
It seems like you're checking a lot of boxes.
For sure. The partners had sold the company in 1971, but detectives were able to track down Melvin and found that he was very cooperative. He immediately identified the barrel as one that they would have used to dye products in. He also recognized the green liquid as matching the color they would use to dye shrubbery and leaves. So detectives turned the focus to Howard and asked if he had ever knew of him having an affair. Melvin confirmed that Howard had a girlfriend that worked in the factory. He described her as an attractive younger woman who was petite with long black hair, and he remembered her having gold in her teeth. That was all they needed to move forward with questioning Howard Elkins. They found that he had retired to Florida as he at that point was 70 years old. So the detectives flew to Florida and knocked on his door. At first, he was very welcoming, inviting them in. They went through the same questions that he had with Melvin, only they got very different answers. Howard said that they never use barrels like that in the plastic business, and he denied the green dye ever being used.
He obviously didn't know that they had talked to his partner then.
Yes, he did not know. And to their surprise, he actually admitted to having an affair with a young woman from the factory, but he claimed he didn't remember anything about her, even her name. He told them there was no way he could describe her, not even the color of her hair.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that's such a dirtbag thing to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You can't even remember her name?
Or the color of her hair.
The color of her hair.
Like you had an affair with her. I think you would know.
Yeah, we're not buying it.
No. So then they asked if he could explain how there was a barrel with a body in it under the house that he owned at the time that she went missing. And he simply said he had no explanation, that he had no knowledge. They asked if they could take a DNA sample from him to compare to the baby she was pregnant with to exclude him. And Howard said, "Oh no, I can't allow that." They explained, it's just a tool that we would use to rule you out as a suspect. We're not trying to prove you did it. We're trying to prove you didn't do it. Please cooperate.
How often is that used?
All the time. And Howard wasn't buying it. Howard immediately was like, "No, I know what you can do with that. Look what they did to OJ." They believed he was involved and that they would be getting what they wanted, whether they had his cooperation or not. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by a phone ringing, and Howard took the call. When he hung up, he said it was his wife and that they needed to leave because he did not want her to see them when she got home.
He didn't want his wife to know that he was a murderer.
Something like that. But he definitely said, "You got to get out." And they said, "We will be back with a warrant for your DNA sample."
So, after they left Howard's, they rushed to a local judge to get a warrant. The next day, the lead detective called his office in New York to give them an update on the case and was informed that the Palm Beach PD had already called them asking if they had arrested Howard Elkins because his wife reported him missing.
Oh, he took off.
Something like that.
By the time the New York detectives touched base with Palm Beach PD, they had located Howard. He was found in the back seat of a friend's vehicle, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot.
No way.
Dirty dirtbag.
He took the easy way out. He didn't want to face it.
Yes, he did.
Ugh.
It turned out that he purchased a 12-gauge shotgun and ammunition after being questioned and apparently chose to take his life where the friend would find him instead of his wife. Question mark. That's the only thing we can figure.
Yeah, the whole getting in the friend's car thing, we don't really know why he did that, other than to maybe keep his wife from finding him.
Yeah, but that's a bad friend.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe just go to jail like you're supposed to.
Yeah, just go to jail.
Just do your time.
Or just flee. Just go on the run.
No, because then there's a dirtbag loose. I guess he's old by this time.
There's no winning in this situation.
No.
There really isn't.
Yeah, he was like 70 at the time, so he's probably thinking, I'm not going to make it in jail, and I won't make it on the run.
70 is a spring chicken, okay? My mom does yoga with some women that are in their 70s and they kick my butt.
Yeah, it's true. And we have covered cases where there's some older dirtbags who can do a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm.
So this, of course, solidified in detectives' minds that he was, in fact, Reyna's killer. Still, they wanted to confirm with that DNA comparison, and sure enough, he was a match as the parent of Reyna's baby. The theory is that Howard showed up at the apartment and somehow convinced Reyna he wasn't angry, so she would go with him to the factory, where he bludgeoned her with a hammer or similar tool 7 to 10 times, placed her body in the barrel, then took the barrel and 4 50-pound bags of pellets to his home with a plan to use the pellets to weigh the barrel down so he could then dispose it in a body of water. Only he placed the pellets in the barrel at his house and then was unable to move it by himself.
Was it the heat from the decomposition of the body that melted the pellets?
Yes, it was basically decomp liquid. They think there might have been some green dye at the bottom of the barrel when he put her in there, and that mixed with just the liquid from decomposition or mummification in this case, because something about the pellets like absorbed stuff as well. I didn't get into super detail on the science behind it all, but yes, something about the mixture of the pellets and the decomp liquid just managed to preserve her body in a sense.
Wow. I wonder what went through his mind after he put all those pellets in and then realized he couldn't lift the barrel.
Right.
Is that when he decided to move?
No, he left the barrel in that space underneath. And we think that's all we can do since he killed himself and never admitted to anything. But he just lived the rest of his days hoping that no one would ever find it or question it. And it worked for 31 years.
Yeah, they lived in the house for a while after that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wonder if it haunted him
I hope it did.
to have her body so close.
Yeah.
We think it did, and we'll explain.
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty much everyone invested in this case was absolutely furious over the fact that this man took advantage of a young immigrant woman who worked for him, disposed of her when she posed a threat to life as he knew it, and then instead of spending 30 years in jail, he got to live as a man with character and integrity.
Yeah, that's not fair.
Exactly.
He literally got away with murder.
Yeah.
Despite Howard taking away their chances at seeing justice served, detectives still took the time to track down Reyna's family in El Salvador.
That was sweet.
Oh, just you hold on.
Yeah, this one made Savannah cry the first time.
I might cry again. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, that means we might.
When they were unable to find the family through the information they obtained in the investigation, they turned to a local reporter who had been covering the case from the beginning. His name is Oscar Corral. He says he just literally showed up in the town that they had narrowed it down to and began knocking on doors. When he arrived at the family home, they were actually celebrating Reyna's mother's 93rd birthday.
Oh, my.
The family assumed he was there to write a puff piece about her being so old, but when he showed her mother Reyna's picture in an article he had written, she immediately began weeping. She told Oscar that for years she had a recurring dream that Reyna was trapped in a barrel going over a waterfall, and that she was only still alive because she wanted to live long enough to find out what happened to her.
No way.
I have goosebumps.
I do too. And on her mother's birthday, after she had those dreams.
That is crazy.
The remains of Reyna and her baby were returned to El Salvador and given a proper funeral and burial. Reyna's mother died just a month later and was buried next to them.
Oh my goodness. So she really did just hang on long enough to find out what happened to her daughter.
Yeah.
Well, that is beautiful.
So, the legal lesson in this case, because normally we would cover court cases, but this dirtbag decided to evade charges and jail time. So the reason that this case stood out to me was because I was appalled to hear that Kathy was turned away from filing a missing persons report, especially for an immigrant who had no family in the U.S. There literally was no family here to report her missing. If she had been able to report it and it had been appropriately investigated, there's a good chance that Howard Elkins would have been caught and actually served time for his crime.
I think you're right, especially if people knew about the affair.
Exactly. And a lot of people did. He did not hide his affairs very well from the sound of it. We only get into them asking his partner questions, but they actually got confirmation of his affairs from former workers in the plant as well.
And that's a really good point about family having to be the ones to report someone missing. Because like you said, what about the person who's moved here from another country and doesn't have family?
Right. So that led me to learn a bit of history on missing persons laws. And I could not confirm whether the officers were being truthful with Kathy back then without access to like the law library, specifically one with New York or New Jersey. But from what I did find, it was very possible that they were being honest, that at the time they could only take missing persons reports from family. What I found was that most states simply allowed whatever police department it was reported to take on the investigation. So it didn't necessarily have to be the department that was where the actual missing person was or lived. So if you reported someone from another city or another state even, it sounds like they would do the investigation, which how can you investigate something when you're not right there? And at the time, there was no national organizations or databases.
Right.
So it appears that the missing person laws were pretty loosey-goosey in general until the 1980s when they started cracking down on child abductions. And it really wasn't until the 1990s and 2000s that the laws began changing to allow stricter protections for adults. Thankfully, today, both New York and New Jersey law specifies that police departments must not only accept a missing persons report from any adult who has a relationship with that missing person that would allow them to know the typical whereabouts of the missing individual, but they also no longer have a waiting period.
Oh, good.
That's key, too. I'm fairly certain that those laws have changed across the U.S. So in our first episode on our podcast, we kind of gave this PSA that if you ever feel like you should file a missing persons report, just know you likely do not have to be a family member, nor do you need to wait. Because I still see a lot of that in like TV shows and movies. So don't wait. Report it as soon as you can. If they tell you that you do need to wait, just Google missing persons laws and then your state. And there should be sites like Justia US Law that gives you the exact language of that state's statute to let you know what the requirements are.
Yes, especially in places like Florida, it's really easy to find your Florida statutes. So if you ever have questions, just do a little bit of research, and it's really not as intimidating as it looks.
Definitely, no matter where you live. Because like you said, I think there is a lot of misconception that you have to wait that 24 hours and you have to be a family member and you have to have good reason to report it. If you are worried, it's better to report it and be wrong than to not report it and feel like you should have.
We have covered those cases where the family has waited to report it because they didn't think that they could. And those hours were critical. They could have saved somebody.
Yeah.
Yes.
The last thing about this case, and the reason that it's one of my favorites, is how well Reyna was treated when she was found. So a lot of times we don't see that in true crime, but Reyna was really treated with as much respect as they possibly could have given her. And they followed through all the way to the end, making sure that she got to where she needed to be. And one of my favorite parts is that in the end, after she had had this horrible violence against her done by a man, the entire team, everybody in the room when they unearthed her body in the lab was a team of women. That was so comforting to me.
The medical examiners were women.
Yes.
I did note that. It's not in my written notes, but I do now remember saying in the first episode that In the documentary episode that I watched on it, it showed footage of them taking her out of the barrel, and they tipped the barrel over and they just sort of like sat there not knowing what to do. And it was actually the women in the room, the medical examiner in particular, who was a very petite woman herself. She just got in there and she delicately like pulled her out of the barrel. And the men are just kind of standing there like not knowing what to do.
Yeah. I was really touched by how she was really handled with so much respect all the way through to when she was buried with her mother.
That is really beautiful. Yeah, you did make me cry.
It's a good one.
It is, because even though she had been gone for that 30 years, she was somebody's family. And her mom waited all that time and stayed on this earth so that she could see her baby girl be brought home.
Yeah.
How beautiful. I'm all about women helping women. And so the way you described that whole scene was just really so touching to me.
Yeah. It stuck with me. Like, Elysia didn't even put it in our notes for tonight, but it's the one thing that I remember distinctly about this case. Like, it just really stuck with me. So I'm glad that you were also appreciative of that.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I think it's important to bring up aspects of the case like that because it humanizes the victim even more so, that this isn't just a sensational case of a barrel under a crawl space. It was somebody's daughter.
So that is the case of Reyna. We didn't name the episode with her name because, you know, you gotta lead with the craziness of the barrel situation. But yeah, but that is the case of Reyna Marroquin. Thank you so much for listening and having us on.
Thank you so much for sharing that case with us. That one is going to stick with me for a while.
You said there was creepy stuff. Is there more to this case?
Did we not? That must have been something that I didn't have in my written notes, but I shared in the first episode as well. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's better late than never. Let's add that in there.
So the owner who was selling the house, Ron Cohen, he talked about how the entire time they lived in the home, they had a nanny who was really freaked out in the home and expressed certain paranormal type things happening, like lights flickering, issues like that. And he just always chalked it up to like, oh no, you guys are crazy. And I mean, he would experience things too, but he just thought there's got to be an explanation for it. And then after they found her body, he was like, oh no, maybe she was actually haunting the place trying to be found. And I totally believe that.
I do too.
Because all the light flickering and all that stopped after she was found.
Yeah, we think so, but because they were moving, we don't have 100% confirmation.
Right.
So that's I wish that I could say it was confirmed, but yeah.
It seems plausible to me. I totally believe it too, that it was her. Especially if her mom was dreaming about it. Did that mean she was coming to her mom for help and to let her mom know? And
right.
Yeah, there's a good chance that she was trying to get people to find her.
I
Wow.
think so.
And in this case, I can't chalk it up to a guilty conscience because it was a different person that was having those experiences.
Yeah. Wow.
Dang it. Christy and I always argue about the ghosties.
Because I totally believe it. And Melissa's a little more skeptical.
You got to show me the evidence. There's usually an explanation, or at least I feel that way. Or else it's just too scary for me.
I was going to say, it's too scary for her to think that it's true, but it is true.
I'm somewhere in the middle. I think that sometimes I totally believe, and sometimes I'm like, well, there's probably an explanation for that. So I think that it's real, but I think sometimes it can just be electrical issues.
Yeah, us INFJs over here, we're like, we need to rule out the logic stuff. And then after we've ruled that out, we're all down for some ghosts.
It's true. And it's kind of funny because a couple of our episodes leading up to this one, we've been talking about paranormal and being visited in dreams and that type of thing. So this was very timely for you to bring us this case.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again for joining us on our podcast. We hope that everyone will go check you out. Where can they find you?
We are on Instagram at Burden of Proof Pod. We are on Facebook at Burden of Proof. We're on TikTok at Burden of Proof Pod. Am I missing something? YouTube, Burden of Proof, a true crime podcast. And anywhere that you listen to podcasts, we are available. I think that's it.
Yes.
So for our listeners, we want to encourage you to go check out. They have a whole back catalog of really awesome episodes that we think that you'll love. So thanks again, ladies, for joining us. And we'll have to do this again soon. It was really fun.
It was. Thank you guys so much.
And for our listeners, we'll be back again next week with you.
Until then,
See ya.
bye.
The dying of perfect. Thank you. They found that he had retired to Florida as that was okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
That doesn't make sense. Let me rephrase that.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.